times,
Morning.
$300 for one.
We're talking with Hannah, and it looks like we're going to suspend the M&M rotation.
So this
For the
Wednesday,
summer.
I have nothing.
Right.
Yes.
And she's going to look at seeing if parents want to do, something. And she said you were interested in doing the pool party again later.
Mm-hmm.
So
It'll be done.
they may have something to do, maybe not every Wednesday night, but
You could do the
something.
pool party twice,
Yeah, that'd be good.
but the pool's not warm enough yet.
I know.
It'll be a while.
I know.
We have to have a bunch of 95-degree days. About a week of 95 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think, there's an obituary in the paper, he's an instrument engineer. Real nice guy. He was part of the Kiwanis Club that supported the Boy Scout troop.
Mm.
And he lived till 95.
Wow.
He retired in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
He was in that, they built that new instrument building next to 1580 over K-Site.
Mm.
Real fine guy.
I was over there
He
in '96, I believe.
he went to Florida. He lived in down Florida, I think, with one of his children
Mm.
when he died. For so many of those engineers, they're gone.
Oh gosh, yes.
And I'm surprised Terry Dawn goes to the Lutheran Church
Yeah.
over here.
Yeah.
And there's a large number of engineers that were part of his church.
Oh, okay.
And they've lost a lot of their folks. Their church attendance is way down.
Well,
And it's
join the club.
like most churches.
Right. Yeah, but I think ours is mostly COVID.
Yeah. I understand this other church, they want to use this
First Christian.
this
Yeah.
this room here. So we'll vacate to another
Yeah.
room for Sunday school.
Has that been decided?
According to Linda, that's what they talked on Wednesday night. Or maybe she got that from the choir Wednesday night. I don't know.
Well, I know they were talking about it, but I don't know that it's been decided.
She said it was, they like this room, there's
Mhm.
accommodations. So,
Yeah, we like it too.
when Brandon shows up, maybe he knows.
Well, but the only thing, if I remember right, the Christian denomination, First Christian, they don't approve in organ music for church.
That's what Linda's saying. There's
Yeah.
certain instruments that they don't use.
It's not in the Bible, so it's not kosher.
You know, maybe they have an orchestra of cymbals and ram's horns.
Yeah. Piano's not in the Bible either. Howdy, howdy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Might have to do this.
I wonder how that's gonna work when Miriam cranks up the organ for practicing before service.
Well, evidently, it's a flip-flop. When we're to have church, they're to have Sunday school, and then vice versa.
Yeah.
We aren't on the same page.
Morning. Hi.
Hey, how are you?
That is Rick Butterini's favoriteest Starbucks coffee. I call it Dragon's Toenails. You open it has a very strong coffee aroma. I like the aroma, but I think that's why Rick's able to have such dark hair from drinking that strong Starbucks coffee.
Let's see if I can do it on my shirt.
It's pretty, it's not too strong.
I
Well,
have water to cool it off, so.
I don't load it up as much as Rick. I can nurse a bag of his coffee a lot longer than whenever he was making it.
Glad to have you guys join us.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
glad to be
We're
here.
gonna
Yeah,
be kicked
thank
out
you.
if we join with the other church. They're gonna have their
Oh,
Sunday,
yeah,
their
In
church
this
service
room.
in this room.
yeah.
They must be pretty small to not want it in that sanctuary.
Yeah, somebody said 20-ish,
Yeah,
20 people-ish.
we're not much larger than that, but I think ours is mostly COVID. Theirs may be
Yeah,
aging.
But they had some type of music program. Dr. Burgess, one of his assistants, Beth English.
oh, yeah, yeah.
Beth has been there
Yeah.
for centuries. I
Her
understand-
sister's one of my closest friends. We live
Okay.
next door. to
Well, I
her.
thought Beth was part of the
She was the
music
organist.
ministry. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think isn't she still?
as far as I know,
Mhm.
but yet
I-
their religion has certain instrument restrictions.
Oh,
That's what I heard. Now I don't hear
Okay.
things like.
Jerry said the same.
I could ask Becky, yeah.
Beth is a hoot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And her mom worked forever.
Yes, yes, at the eye center.
Forever.
Mm-hmm. She's at the courtyards now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And she would go to the football games with
Mhm.
Beth. We
Mhm.
sat in the same section
Oh,
up on the top.
yeah. Now, Dr. Burgess.
Hey,
No.
Stroke.
He had a, he
Or
had a
aneurysm or
widow,
something.
he had a widow heart attack up in Canada. He
Oh, this
went-
was recently.
Oh, this was a couple of years ago.
Well, I mean,
Is it-
recently he had an event.
He had another one?
Yes.
3 weeks, it's about
They
3 weeks
they
ago.
shipped him over 3 weeks ago to
Wasn't
Fort
it?
Sanders. I don't know at first if they thought it was either a stroke or an aneurysm, and I need to get an update on that. But he collapsed at the office.
Ooh, what he had up in Canada, and he didn't go to the emergency room the following morning, and they said, you should be dead.
Really?
Yeah, it was a bad one, so they kept him up there, then they had the air ambulance
Oh, my
him
goodness.
back here,
Yeah.
but he recovered from that, but I didn't know he had a,
Yeah. This was recent. Yeah.
well, dentists
I need to find
they're right up there as far as stress
Yeah.
and heart attack
Yeah.
prone.
Yeah.
When you look at him, he's his livelihood and
Mm-hmm.
the staff, and he just, when he walks in with his track shoes, he runs solid for 8 to 10 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Saved your seat.
Yes, I hope he's okay.
Then he'd take out the trash, go to the bank,
He did it all.
he did it all.
Who you talking about?
I don't know.
Dr. Burgess,
Johnny Burgess,
John Burgess,
Our dentist,
because John
their friend.
and Beth and Martha and Richard Parker, I think they were all in the same Oak Ridge
Oh.
high school class.
Yeah, did John, was he older than you?
Younger.
Younger, yeah, yeah. He might have been in my class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Beth's dad was a history teacher.
The high school, yeah.
Something was going on in Emery Road. There were 2 fire trucks and a rescue vehicle.
Emery
all-
Valley?
Yeah. Well, not Emery Valley, Briarcliff.
Oh,
That's where they were headed.
Hmm.
I don't know what was going on, but they had a ladder truck and another regular fire truck.
They have a package deal, you get the whole
Yeah.
crew.
I don't think you get 2 fire engines unless they say there's fire.
Well, it's the fun
I
and
didn't see
thrill.
any smoke, but something was going on.
It's the fun, thrill, and excitement. It's probably a little boring
It is.
Sunday morning, so going for a ride and making some loud noise.
If somebody gets a heart attack, you get police, fire, truck, and emergency vehicle. Because I guess they don't know who's gonna get there first.
They have a competition to see who's
Get
gonna
the whole
get there first.
shebang.
Yeah. It's a friendly little
Well, they
competition.
use it as a drill, so they keep.
Yeah.
There's not much going on in this town. That's what I see. Like you never see just one emergency vehicle.
We've had them roll in and they go, "We're
Yeah.
first again."
Brandon.
Brandon, I don't know how other people would feel, but when we're done with this one, sometime I would love to do a historical look at the Bible, but also bring in the history of other places that were happening. Because
That would be
I've never
cool.
been able to kind of put the two histories together, what you get from.
Yeah, that would be big. I would have to.
Yeah,
I'd have to get
that
some resources for that one. I had actually been working on an idea for. I mean, this one will go on for quite some time, but I had been trying to work on or think about what I wanted to do next, which would also be another long-term Sunday school exploration. I think everybody would find it interesting, but I like that one too. I like that idea too, of just the goings on of the history. I'd have to find some resources and material to see,
If it's too hard,
So-
It's
It's not, hard maybe not, but it's enormous, It's kind of like this though, but yeah, I'll definitely keep that one jotted down because I really like these long-term plans. That make it much easier for Sunday school than trying to just whip up a Sunday school lesson from week to week. All right. Well, so we're getting close to moving out of this discussion of infinity. You guys are probably grateful for that, but we're gonna wrap up. We're gonna wrap up on that subject today, and then we'll move on to another area of this natural theology. But before I get into that, we have a trustee meeting on Tuesday, May the 31st. That's pretty close. At 7 p.m. in room 105, so if you're trustee, be there. Town hall meeting. There's going to be another town hall meeting for everyone who was at last Wednesday. It's going to be part 2 of that. So it'll be coming Wednesday, June 1st, again at 6 p.m. as usual, to talk about the church property and that sort of thing, and hear concerns and comments and those sorts of things. Finance committee meeting is Thursday, June the 2nd, and at 5 p.m. also in room 105. Saturday, June the 4th, starting at 9 a.m. is Vacation Bible School work day. Not entirely sure when does Vacation Bible School start? On the 6th?
I think it's the same.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I guess, it's just preparation for VBS. There's a Passport Kids Camp meeting for kids and parents on June the 5th at 12 p.m. in room 105. So, if Passport is in your future or your kid's future, that's the place to be to get the info. And then, here at Vacation Bible School, June 6th through June the 9th from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. And you can register for VBS at firstbaptistvbs.org, or you can pick up a form down in the narthex. And then there's another Passport. This is a Passport Youth Camp meeting for the youth and parents is on June 12th. That's a Sunday, and that's going to be after worship, and it's going to be up here in this room. And then again, the nightlife groups are starting in August, where they're wanting some small groups to get together and meet in the homes of the congregation for a book study. They're going to talk about Jen Hatmaker's Simple and Free. So if you would like to volunteer to lead the discussion or to offer your home as the place to meet, then please notify the church office. They're trying to have a list of both of those before everybody goes on vacation for the summer. And that's it. That's all of our announcements. So I'll go ahead and open in prayer, and then we'll get started with Sunday school. Dear Lord, we just thank you for another beautiful day, for another opportunity to gather together in your name, to worship you and to talk about you, discuss you, think about you. And Lord, we just pray that these things would be fruitful, that you would accept our worship, that you would be with us in our studies and in our thoughts and in our hearts, and help us with our struggles. Help us to learn more about you, to imitate you, and just to be like Christ in this world, whatever situations we find ourselves in. We're all unique, Lord, and just help us to apply these things to our lives and help us to reach out to those around us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Mm-hmm.
So last week we discussed Hilbert's Hotel, which was this thought experiment that was developed by that German mathematician that we talked about, David Hilbert. And the result of Hilbert's illustration is this awareness of the bizarre consequences that result from, from having an actual infinite number of things. And so as a reminder, the reason that we're interested in an infinite, or we're interested in infinity, is due to the second premise of the Kalam cosmological argument, which is the universe began to exist. Oh, hey, and you know what I realized? This coffee mug actually has the Kalam cosmological argument printed on the side of it. I did not do that on purpose. I've had that for a while, and I made 2 cups of coffee this morning, so I had to bring it with me. But since it's a common atheist objection that the universe is beginningless, that it just exists and has always been, then it's important to see if an actual infinite is even possible, because that's what the implication would be, is that the universe has existed for infinity, or infinitely. So if the universe is beginningless, having existed eternally into the past, then it follows that there has to be an infinite number of past events prior to now. So that's kind of why we're interested in that. But Al-Ghazali, the one who developed the argument that we're discussing, he argued that an actual infinite number of things cannot exist in the real world. And so therefore the universe must, the past can't be infinite, and the universe must have a beginning. So today we're going to move on to one more of Al-Ghazali's argument, very similar, very much related, but it is an independent argument to show that the universe began to exist. This second argument also deals with infinity, but it's independent of the first argument that we've been discussing. And so the second argument goes to show that even if you think an actual infinite number of things could exist, it's still the case that a series of past events cannot actually be infinite. And so you would still wind up with, a beginning of the universe, basically. So even if you're resolved to believe that an actual infinite could exist in the real world, despite the arguments against it, you still can't have an infinite series of past events, which is what would be required if the universe did not have a beginning. What Al-Ghazali observed is that a series of past events is formed by adding, one event, one thing, after another in successive addition. It's like a string of, think of a string of dominoes falling one after the other until you reach the final domino. And that domino would be today in this case. But as Al-Ghazali argues, there is no series which is formed by adding one member after another, that's formed by successive addition. There's no series like that can be, actually be infinite, because you cannot pass through an infinite number of things one at a time. It just doesn't work that way. And this is pretty easy to see in the case of trying to count to infinity, like we talked about. You could just keep on counting forever. Not to mention, you had to start somewhere. And so no matter how high you count, there's always an infinity of numbers left to count. So therefore, no one can actually count to infinity. You could just go on counting into eternity, but you'll never arrive at infinity. You would always be at it would always be finite at any given point. So if it's not possible to count to infinity, then it's also not possible to count down from infinity. You have the same problem. You're just coming at it from a different direction. You would just continually be driven back into the past, never reaching an actual starting point. And so you'd never actually even be able to begin counting. So there isn't an actual beginning to this process, just as a beginningless universe would have no point of its beginning. That sounds confusing. So today, this moment, or this domino, if you were thinking of the dominoes, it could never actually be reached, or this domino would never actually fall, because the series of events that would bring us to today, to the present, could never actually begin. And yet here we are. So again, this is kind of those absurd consequences that you get with infinities. Now you could pick any finite series, any finite part of the series and count down from there. For example, you could start at -1 billion and then count count down from there, that sort of thing. But the problem is not how any finite part of the series can be reached or can be counted. The question is how the whole infinite series can be counted, and it can't. You just can't do it. It's simply not possible because you can never reach infinity. So this was Al-Ghazali's argument, is that even if you believe that an actual infinity could somehow exist in the real world, you still could not have a universe, or really you just can't, period. You just can't have a series of past events that are infinite. They have to be finite and have a beginning. And so Al-Ghazali sought to illustrate or emphasize the impossibility of forming an actual infinite past with an illustration. He says to imagine our solar system. And if you don't know, Jupiter and Saturn both orbit our sun. It's actually not that simple, but you can think of it that way. So Jupiter and Saturn both orbit the sun. So imagine that for every single orbit that Saturn completes around the sun, Jupiter completes 2, because Jupiter is actually closer to the sun. So it rotates a little. So imagine that for every single rotation or orbit that Saturn makes, Jupiter makes 2. And Al-Ghazali was aware of this, in his time. So notice that the longer that they orbit, the further Saturn falls behind in its number. So you got 1 and 2, then you got 2 and 4, and so on and so forth. So if Jupiter has completed 10 million orbits, then Saturn has only done 5 million. If they continue to orbit forever, they will approach a limit at which Saturn is infinitely far, further behind than Jupiter. Now, of course, they'll never arrive at that point. That's what we were saying earlier. But nevertheless, they'll approach this limit, as long as they continue to orbit. So Al-Ghazali says, we'll turn this story around. He says, suppose Saturn and Jupiter have been orbiting the sun from eternities past. Now, which one has completed the most orbits? If they've both been orbiting the sun from eternities past with no beginning, well then, which one has orbited the sun the most amount of times? Mathematically, the answer is that the number of orbits completed by each of them is equal, because it would be infinity. They would be exactly the same. They've both completed an infinite number of orbits. So we're dealing with an actual infinite number of orbits. And so even though, Jupiter completes more orbits over time, if the two have been orbiting from eternities past, then mathematically they're equal. They have the same number of orbits, which is kind of absurd, right? It doesn't sound right. So by having them orbit from eternities past, their number of orbits just magically become equal, basically, when you throw infinity in there. And so Al-Ghazali, then he adds a little bit of extra fuel to the fire here, and he asks, and, if they have been orbiting from eternities past, is the number of orbits from eternity odd or even? And the answer is that it's both. So, again, he's just trying to show how absurd this gets when you throw infinity into the mix. And so that's his second argument for an implication, or for showing how absurd it is to try to have an actual infinity work in the real world. And there's actually a modern day, or there's a contemporary version of this argument. I don't think it's any better, but this argument was developed by Alexander Pruss of Baylor University and Rob Coons of the University of Texas at Austin. And what they do is, I guess they make it a little more morbid. They say, imagine there's this infinite number of grim reapers who are devoted to killing you, to your death. These are the guys that are coming to take you to wherever you go when you die, and they ensure that you die. So you have an infinite number of these grim reapers, and they're all prepared to kill you on a schedule. So suppose you're alive at midnight.
They've watched too much Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, or Supernatural. That's the last time I remember seeing a grim reaper, is that show Supernatural. But suppose you're alive at midnight, And the very last Grim Reaper of this infinite collection of Grim Reapers is scheduled to never mind the problem that there's a last one in an infinite set of Grim Reapers. But so suppose the very last Grim Reaper is scheduled to strike you dead at midnight if you are still alive at that point. There's no chance of you surviving past midnight, barring something like a resurrection. So then the next to the last Grim Reaper, we'll call him Grim Reaper number 2. He is scheduled to strike you dead at a half a minute before midnight if you're still alive at that point. And then so every Grim Reaper from there, so on and so on, is scheduled to strike you dead at half of the time, down to the minutes and seconds of the next Grim Reaper. I don't know if you can really see the issue at first here, but what happens is that it leads to an impossibility. You can't survive past midnight because that last Grim Reaper is for certain going to kill you if you're still alive. But you can't be killed by any Grim Reaper at any given time because you would already be dead by then. So you cannot possibly, survive or escape death, but yet you can never actually be killed because of the infinite number of Grim Reapers who are scheduled to kill you. And so, these illustrations can be helpful, but, in realizing that no collection of things which is formed by adding one thing at a time can actually be infinite. So that's essentially what Al-Ghazali was arguing with the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn. And then, these guys, these Pruss and Coons, they kind of developed this more morbid one. It's not any better, but it's just a newer version of the same argument. But this argument from Al-Ghazali can be summarized as follows. A collection formed by successive addition cannot be an actual infinite. A temporal series of events is a collection that's formed by successive addition. Therefore, a temporal series of events cannot be an actual infinite. A temporal series of events meaning all of the events in the universe starting from the beginning of the universe. Temporal events are events in time, and time began with the universe. And so the argument is a series of temporal events just can't possibly be infinite. And I think Al-Ghazali has proven that, philosophically. So, in order to wrap this up, what we've seen and argued here is that the idea of an infinite past is absurd. The past cannot be infinite, and so it must have a beginning. The universe must have a beginning. Going forward, if these arguments seem a little tough, because we really haven't gotten deep into them mathematically and that sort of thing, but they do seem a little tough. They are to me, but they can be simplified. So if you ever are need to think about these things on demand, or you maybe need to communicate them to somebody, share it with someone. The first argument we looked at is based on how an actually infinite number of things cannot exist. So if you're trying to think about this in a simple way, or share it with someone in a simple way, instead of trying to do some sort of deep philosophical dive into the argument, you can just simply point out the absurdities that would result if an actual infinite number of things could exist. For example, you can think or ask, what is infinity minus infinity? It's a very simple question, but you get self-contradictory answers when you try to do this. You would think that infinity minus infinity equals 0, right? I mean, that's how it works with everything else. A number minus a number is 0. But when when we subtracted, an infinite amount of odd numbers from the infinite amount of all natural numbers, we still got infinity. So in that case, it was infinity minus infinity equals infinity. And in fact, what I've learned via YouTube and mathematicians with whiteboards is that you can actually make infinity minus infinity equal whatever you want. Just because of the axioms and the rules that they've developed for working with the number infinity, you can make infinity minus infinity literally equal any result that you want. So that just goes to show that this is just a conceptual idea in the mind, and it's not a real thing. Infinity is not something that actually exists in reality, not an actual infinity anyway. The second argument was based upon this impossibility of forming an actual infinite through successive addition, like we talked about. For that argument, you could give a simple illustration of, like the dominoes. You could say, imagine an infinite series of dominoes and ask, how can the present domino ever fall if an infinite number of past dominoes had to fall first, one after the other? You would never get to the present domino, because you could just keep going infinitely into the past and you never arrive at the first domino to start falling. So it just doesn't happen. It's absurd. And you can dig much deeper into each one, or you could even come up with just simpler illustrations if you wanted. Those are just some that I ran across. But the gist of those, of each of those can be shared in a relatively, straightforward way. So that concludes our discussion of the philosophical arguments for the beginning of the universe. And the next thing that we're going to move on to is the scientific evidence for the beginning of the universe. We'll jump more into this specifically. We'll start with this, in the specifics next week. But we actually have pretty strong evidence for the beginning of the universe when it comes to scientific evidence. And so the scientific evidence kind of works as a confirmation for the conclusions that we've reached with the philosophical arguments for the beginning of the universe. And it's science, so we're not dealing with certainties here, but what we can reasonably say is that given the scientific evidence that we have, it is more probable than not that the universe does in fact have, or did have, a beginning. This is especially true now in modern times, post 19th century, and that we've had the advent of the Big Bang model of the beginning of the universe, and we've also had the discovery of cosmic inflation, which shows that the universe is expanding. So it started somewhere and it just continues to expand and that sort of thing. So that's we'll jump into those are the things that we'll jump into next week. We'll start talking about the Big Bang and the implications there, and the guys who we'll talk about the guys who created that theory and that model, and it's the most widely held theory for the beginning of the universe today. So it's pretty much unanimously held.
So poof doesn't work.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with the Big Bang theory. It almost is kind of a poof.
Yeah,
you can take science all the way back to a certain point, but then what's on the other side of that is a big question mark. But that's also, the Big Bang theory has that implication that, well, what was before that?
Right.
Because time and everything, and so that's why you've had these other scientists, Hawking and some others who have, and there's lots of them now. I don't pretend to know. I'm not up to speed on it, but there's been lots of theories developed over the years to try and show that the universe didn't have a beginning. And they make these models work, I think, a lot of times, on a whiteboard. But that's all it is a theory. And it doesn't really line up with what the evidence that we have shows us. So we'll talk more. We'll start talking more about those things next week, and I think that'll be pretty interesting too. So that's it. That was a pretty short class today because I didn't really want to jump into the science part. I've only started those notes, and I'm no scientist, so I'm having to depend heavily on others in order to jot that information down. But we'll pick back up there next week, so you guys can have a break from thinking about infinity and try to recover from all of that, a little extra, and that extra 15 minutes to your week. Is there any questions or concerns or anything about what we've talked about so far? Doesn't even have to be about infinity. It can be about something else,
I'm gonna have to drink some of Rick's coffee. These heavier presentations you've been given.
Well,
My simple military mind, it tries to line up ducks and get them to quack in unison. The green tea isn't cutting it. I need something a little stronger.
Well, that's why, I brought this. Of course, I brought it on a short day when I didn't really have to dive into anything too deep. But
And I appreciate what you've done.
it is tough. Well,
Into some of these.
I've enjoyed reading it, so I'm trying my best to communicate it. But
Yeah, I especially appreciate because Robert's an atheist, and we get into discussions from
Mhm.
time to time, and he usually out-discusses me.
Yeah.
I think some of this will help, hopefully.
yeah, and a lot of times, it's just a lot of times those discussions are, there's good answers. You just may not know. And sometimes it's hard to make sense of the questions, the actual root of the problem that people are having when they're asking questions. So it can be difficult. If you ever, feel free to send me emails and stuff if you guys ever have any questions as well. And then the Facebook group, that's just us and the people that are members here at the church that we've invited into it. So any questions you have, and it doesn't have to be related to this. I'm just saying if you did have questions leaving here for any Sunday school, throw them in there. But I'll be glad to try and help. I really do enjoy it. So, but yeah, we'll leave a little bit of this philosophical stuff behind for a short period and talk about science, which is a little bit easier, I think, sometimes to wrap your head around, because we're looking at empirical type stuff rather than doing thought experiments and that sort of thinking is hard, It is for me sometimes. So, all right, we all are free to go. Thank you very much.